everybody. So welcome to another iteration of the Messaging Maven. Messaging Maven is the community where anybody who sends business critical messages or is interested in business critical messaging can come and understand more about how to use it, what to do, but also to learn more about how financial services work, how logistics services work, etc., etc. A community to share information about how to make customer communication and everything surrounding that a lot better. What are we going to talk about today? Well, as the title already suggested, we'll be talking about SMS cost. More specifically, we'll be talking about one of the aspects that should be quite easy to understand, but is actually quite complicated, which is what actually constitutes the cost of a single text message. What the actual costs are, right? What makes the numeric value? First and foremost, and let's get the biggest, most important thing out of the way first. What is the actual cost of terminating a text message for a mobile operator? If we look at the cost of the cheapest possible wholesale message in the world at volume, then we realistically understand the actual cost of sending an actual text message for an operator is fairly close to zero. Lowest wholesale price you can ever find in the world is less than 1/10 of a cent. We're talking about maybe 1/10 of a cent. So what this means is that the price a text message actually has for a business or for a consumer or for anybody else is ultimately the result of a discretionary decision made by the operator. So this is the first thing we need to take into consideration. Whenever we think about what's the cost of an SMS, we need to understand that it is the decision of that particular mobile network operator to decide what they determine the cost or the value of that particular text message into their network to be. First and foremost, that's the most important thing to take into consideration first. From there on out, you can understand why there's such a large gap between the cheapest market in the world and the highest priced market in the world, right? You can talk about differences that range in hundreds to thousands of times in differences in a single unit value for pretty much the exact same product or the exact same message per se, right? And that's where it comes from. It's a discretionary decision. So if we now know that it is a discretionary decision and it does come down to the operator deciding, what are the decision criterias often taken into consideration that mold the price of an SMS and create these differentiations between a price in one market and a price in another market? First, international versus local companies, or more specifically, can you send messages as an international business or as a local business? Most often, mobile network operators consider local businesses to be not more of a priority, but do give them a leg up in sending messages into their actual local markets, which means that quite often sending a message as a local business is 10 times cheaper than sending it as an international business. So the question is, what constitutes an international business and when can you send messages as a local business? Usually, you can send business messages as a local company if you have a local entity, but most often it depends on the actual operator themselves whether they consider you a local company or not, irregardless of whether you have an entity or not. So let's take Facebook, for example. Facebook is local to pretty much no country in the world, whether they have a local office somewhere or not. Just because they have a local office in Nigeria, for example, doesn't mean that they'll be able to determine or terminate their messages into a mobile network operator's network as a local company. Whether they have people working there, whether they have a local entity there, usually they will not be able to do so. So major global brands pretty much always are considered as international companies. And then if you're a company that only works in that particular market, only has business in that particular market, and has your entity only in that market, you will most likely be considered a local company and you'll be able to send messages using local routes and local rates, which are, 10x, sometimes 100x cheaper than the international ones. However, the hardest part to determine is if you're kind of in the middle. Let's say that you're a company providing services in 10 different countries that are all neighboring. So are you local to the market that's next to you, where you also have your offices, where you have your business, but you're mainly registered in the first company or the first country that you actually started in, your group's registered there. How does that actually play into this? So it's very much, again, down to the sort of operator's discretionary decision. And that's why usually when you start actually thinking about the cost of an SMS, the first thing you need to understand is, can you send messages as a local company, or do you have to send messages as an international company? That will already create a chasm of difference in a lot of countries. Bear in mind, not every country has this differentiation between local and international, right? It's less common in Europe, for example. It's less common in North America, less common in Latin America, more common in a lot of African countries, more common in the APAC region, for example. What type of content are you sending? Are you sending one-time passcodes, so PIN codes? Are you sending transactional messages like payment reminders, for example? Or are you sending promotional content? All of these different content types can have different pricing. Quite often, one-time passcodes will have the cheapest price and the promotional messages will have the highest price, mainly because filtering them, actually understanding the content, checking the content, and the procedures going around the promotional content are more stringent, and more work equals a higher price, right? So that can be another layer determining how much you're going to actually pay for a message. It, of course, depends very much on how the actual market decides and how the operator decides to price things. Maybe they'll have a flat price, but they're just differentiating between local and international. But maybe they'll have tiers, first local versus international, and then depending on what your particular use case is. Let's say you're sending local OTPs, and you'll have one price, local promotional will have another. Or if you're an international business, the same will apply. It all depends on the actual operator making those decisions. And then the last layer that we've seen is industry-based pricing. So if you're a financial service provider, you'll have one pricing. If you're a logistics provider, you'll have another pricing. If you're a healthcare provider, you'll have a third price level to take into consideration. What this ultimately means is that for the most difficult market in the world, for example, and there are a few in the APAC region that are especially difficult to understand in terms of pricing, you could be looking at 3 different tiers of understanding before you understand what your price is. So you'll be looking at, first, are you a local or an international company? Then are you sending OTPs or promotional transactional messages? And then what's the actual industry that you're in? And that will add another layer of pricing difficulty to that. Or on the flip side of things, take a market like Estonia, where pretty much there's no differentiation between traffic at all. Are you a local, international? No one cares. Are you sending promo or OTP? No one cares. What industry you're in? No one cares as well. It's one price fits all. And that's where the difficulty comes into play as well. And that's where the nuance in understanding why the price of a message in one country is different from the price of another in another country. And then the last level, which determines the cost of an SMS, is quite often how much do you actually send? How many messages per month are you going to terminate into an operator's network will be the determining factor behind what price you'll be paying as well. This is especially from an aggregator's perspective, and this is why quite often when you go directly to a mobile network operator, you will be paying a higher price than you will be paying with an aggregator, because essentially an aggregator will probably have 10x, 20x, 100x the volume that you have in your business. And because of that, the operators will give them price A, and they will give you, based on your volume, price B that's maybe 30%, 50%, 60% higher than what the aggregator is paying. So the aggregator can give you a price that's lower than the price you would get from operators, but higher than the price they are paying, ergo making a profit in between and creating that service for you in between. So that's how what we would call clean or market price or use case-based price, how the actual value of a pure channel, nothing done to it, just a real clear pricing of that messaging from an operator's perspective, from an aggregator's perspective, actually functions. So that's your baseline, right? Let's say you're sending 3 million messages to Norway. Norway has no local versus international, no content-based pricing. And this is what you would be quoted by an operator. This is what you would be quoted by an aggregator. That's the numbers you'll be looking at, right? Now, where it gets more difficult and harder to understand from a basic level is when we start thinking about how offers get made that are below market price. And anybody who has had enough offers, especially from companies where, you will get an offer for 4 companies and they're roughly in the same range, and then a company will come in and offer 20% below them. So your question is, or should be, how is that possible? Now, there are multiple ways to drive down the cost of a text message for an aggregator, or even for an operator, but more commonly for an aggregator, while providing you the service basically at cost. What they would be paying for the operator, they will give you as well. Largest possible volume discount that they could get, they will hand you that same price. The question is, how is that possible? And this is where the manipulation of messages and messaging flow comes into play. What you will hear is a word called blending. And what blending essentially means is, if you think about sending messages through a pipe, you could send them through one direct pipe between you, the aggregator, and then the operator. Or you could send it from you to your aggregator, and the aggregator decides on multiple pipes that they will actually send it through. Maybe one pipe is a legitimate channel, the main channel that they're using. Maybe another channel is a workaround. Maybe the other channel is just a SIM card that they bought that they're utilizing for messaging on one or another way, which will drive down the costs that they have associated with that. That's called blending. You essentially take one connection that I'm providing to you, put multiple connections at different price points behind it, driving the aggregate price of an SMS down, right? I'll send 90% here at, price X. I'll send 10% here at 50% the cost of the original sort of route, and I'll be making a margin from that particular price point, right? So that's how I'll be making money on top. The second way is, of course, AIT. We've been talking about AIT quite a lot, which is the action of creating a situation where you're generating traffic that the client will pay for, but the aggregator actually doing AIT or creating those attacks for you, the exclusive gateway provider doing that for sort of to you, will not be paying the operator for those messages. They will intercept it beforehand. So essentially, they'll be making 100% margin on the same thing. So let's say you're blending 95 to 10 on 10% of the messages. You'll be making, in blending, you'll be making 50% margin on 90%, you'll be making 0. So you want to extend it more. So an aggregator will add another 10% of AIT on top, from which you will be not sending your 100% of messages, you'll be sending 110% of messages, in which that additional 10% on top of the 100 will be at 100% margin. So they'll be making a little bit of extra money again on top of that. And then the worst part for me, at least, or the thing that I kind of despise the most about creating these artificial pricings and trying to drive the industry's pricing down in a way, is message trashing. And message trashing is essentially, okay, so I've decided that, taking out of your 100% of traffic, I'll add 10% on top, I'll blend 10%, and then I just won't send 5% out. 5% of messages, just not send out, keep in-house and charge you anyways. And by doing these different maneuvers, ultimately, if you're especially talking about promotional content, because for promotional content, doing, blending and then doing, for example, message trashing is easier because you'll be looking at the actual conversions per se. In that, you could sell at cost and make a 15% margin without usually businesses noticing, unless they are asking the right questions and checking the right things in order to understand whether the pricing that they're being given is fair or isn't fair as such. So why is it important to understand specifically what questions to ask? One, of course, what is the pricing itself? Is this pricing that I'm getting fair? Is this pricing that I'm getting real? Is this pricing actually in conjunction with the real market price of a text message? The best way to understand this, of course, is asking a lot of companies. But you want to know what the rough market price is. If you ask enough companies for a pricing quote, you will understand what the average is. You will understand that some companies will do a very similar price offer and some will be different. And usually the more similarities between a price offer, the more legitimate that price offer will most likely be for you to understand. You will know what the market price actually is. And you will know which service provider is giving you a market rate price and who might be adjusting the way they send messages in order to specifically give you the ability to have a lower message price, but also a lot less value, because you're paying maybe for more messages. Not all of your messages are actually getting there, or those that are getting there will not have the same trust associated as it would with a proper branded message, for example. Understanding how the business you're working with actually functions. Are they a business that is here to provide price, or are they a business that is here to provide value? There's a huge difference. Businesses that are willing to provide you value will give you the real market price and are most usually even willing to say what their actual margin is, because they know that the price you are paying on top of a text message is for the services, the expertise, the products, the features that they provide, that we provide, and that we know have a distinct value. They understand their own value as a business, and they are going to provide a service that is based on value, not simply based on the commodity price that they can tune, adjust, and create for themselves in the best possible manner. And last but not least, why do you need to understand who you're working with? Is understanding who are the actual experts. Who are the ones who understand the market that you're working with? Do they understand enough to advise you on what to do, how to use business messaging, how to create these different adjustments within their own businesses, and how to understand how to do these things? One of the best ways to find out by asking the right questions. What to ask? First and foremost, price. What is the pricing offer? Just a really regular pricing offer, your main markets, your volume, and then understanding what the different prices are. And then comparing that price to the list price that the business is actually putting out. We have no problem showing you how much your volume will cost. We, of course, have volume-based discounts as well. It's only logical. If your message amount per month is in the hundreds, we will be probably making, in the tens of cents or a few euros of profit. So we're going to have to make sure that every interaction we have is not generating a loss, in work hours and everything else. So the margin for a smaller volume is obviously bigger than the margin for a higher volume, because the amount of work associated with a lower volume and the margins associated with that just makes sense that way. But there is another great way to understand and check whether the market price you're being offered is actually legitimate or not. There are a few markets in the world where the price of a message into an operator's network is public. Norway, for example, Norway Telenor. The price into that specific market is publicly available on that operator's website, and everybody, including every major aggregator, regardless of the volume, pays the exact same price. So if you want to understand whether or not you're going to get a legitimate offer or not a legitimate offer, ask for a pricing to Norway for, let's say, 3 million promotional messages per month, and make your target below that market price and see whether they will accommodate or not. And if they will accommodate, if they will give you a price below that actual market price that you can check yourself, that won't be something that I'll tell you, right? But would rather be something that they actually, sort of present to you, and the operator itself says that this is the actual price, and the aggregator you're talking to is going to give you an offer below that market price. And the question is how? How can they give you a price below the price that they're paying? They can offer it. They have to somehow manufacture the margin in there. There are no businesses that want to work without a margin just for their own sake. There's always a way somebody's going to make their money in this business as in any other business as well. So ask for these types of things, ask for pricings, and then create real comparisons. Ask what the price consists of. What's the market price? What's the margin? Ask what fees are going to be on top. Are you paying for the service? Are you paying for the support? Are you paying for additional features? Are you losing out on some features if you're not paying for certain aspects of the business? Understand what it is that the price of the actual product consists of. And if they give you a pricing quote, be quite wary of something very, very special. Many aggregators will say that they have a special deal with one or another aggregator or one or another operator. I'm going to be honest with you, special deals most often are super rare, and special deals are more often associated with ultimately businesses doing the same things in the background, but just using a different justification for why they specifically are doing that particular thing. And then understand, what is the value that this business is bringing? Is this just a pipe that will give you access to sending messages globally? Or is there additional value? Are you talking to experts who can help you and adjust how you do business messaging? Do they have tools such as, the most basic, like an SMS length calculator that can tell you whether, the campaign you're going to do or whether the template you're going to use for OTPs is going to cost you the equivalent of one text message or two text messages? Are you using the right characters or the incorrect characters? Do they have auto replace? Do they have fraud prevention tools that are in place to help mitigate damage from things like AIT? Or do they protect your brand in the wholesale market? Are they going to blacklist any other provider from sending your sender ID related messages? Are they going to protect your brand? Are they going to advocate in front of the operators for you? Or are they just going to be a service provider that's just going to, provide you a connection and then, if something breaks, answer in 48 hours for your critical business messages? What's the value that they're doing? And you can also understand their stance on things like fraud and things like how are they treating the business as a whole by, what organizations are they part of? I'll draw an example that we're part of. We're part of the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. That is a sort of an umbrella organization to help advance the mobile ecosystem. And a part of that ecosystem is the code of conduct, the messaging code of conduct. Now, there are more than 200 members who are part of this community and probably 30-ish who have signed the messaging code of conduct. Businesses that have agreed to make sure that the services they provide are value-based and that the same tips and tricks that they said that some use in order to drive the messaging costs down and make a margin are not utilized to maintain the integrity of business messaging as a channel. As businesses, us and the other companies that have signed the code of conduct, our interest is not to make a bit more in the short term, but make sure that this channel exists from 10 years from now as well. So we would still have a business, not have more margin for 2 quarters and then have the channel die off in a few years and us lose our business as well. So understanding that as well. And then last but not least, do they understand messaging at large? What are the trends? What are they seeing? How are the market's developing? How is business messaging developing? There are constant new iterations of things that are going on. The advancement of rich messaging. Understanding whether they're actually in the game and understand how this whole ecosystem is developing is key to understanding whether they are able to truly provide real value or they're not really going in the right direction that you would want them to go into. And that's it. Those are the main things that I would do. So in conclusion, make sure you understand what you are actually buying, what pricing, what fees, what product, what is the actual value that is being generated for you. Everybody wants to make a profit. Try to understand if they're making the profit based off of value or the profit based off of tricks. And thirdly, am I actually talking to experts? Are these people really knowledgeable people from the business messaging industry who understand this business, care about this business, and are looking to provide a service that advances it rather than makes a quick buck off of it? Those are my main 3 tips and tricks that I would say. Cool. Let us see if we have some questions in play as well. Let me see. Let's see. First one. Is there a regulation? How often can providers change prices? Let's say I sign with a fairly good price, but the provider raises it almost immediately. Unfortunately, no. To be honest, there are certain markets where there are regulations in play to an extent, but most of the time, I'll draw you an example. When an exclusive gateway is sold off, so basically an operator doesn't want to manage all of the SMS business themselves, So they'll sell the rights to actually provide the gateway, register, sign, create connections, etc., etc. They'll sell it to one player. Most usually what you will see is that price going up by 5x. And if we look at the pricing differences in the last 3 years, so from 2020 to today, the global average message price has gone up by more than 100%. 260 different operators in the world have risen prices by above 100% in that particular time frame. The average global international price has gone from 3 cents to 6 cents. There are really no limits to where it can go. At the start of the war, Russia's pricing went from being, I think, like 2 to maybe 7 cents a message to 9 cents a message to going up to 35 cents a message. Sky's the limit, really, unfortunately, in where it can go. And there are very few regulations to stop it. Is there an obligation on the provider side to inform you about price changes and may in case unusual traffic is noticed? Maybe in case unusual traffic is noticed. It depends on what the contract you have is signed. So the hard thing about it is operators will raise prices quite often with short notices. So maybe a month in advance, sometimes week, 2 weeks in advance. Exclusive providers, same thing. New price will be from June 1st or July 1st, right? And you're in the middle of April, in the middle of June when you actually find out. So there will usually be a notification window that is small. And then for anybody downstream, it works the same way. So okay, so in 2 weeks, the price is going to be raised. So then people take, a few moments to adjust, understand whether this is legitimate or whether this is not legitimate. Are other operators following up? They take, 3 to 5 business days to actually figure this out properly, and then they will notify their clients. But at that point in time, maybe it's only a week, maybe it's only 2 weeks that the notification goes in. And it really depends on what you have in the contract as well. Is there a minimal notification period or is there not? Most usually, there won't be. Because when the operators raise the prices, the aggregators are usually forced to raise the prices as well. Because a price raise is very rarely 20, 25%, which is, the average margin that an aggregator will make off a business text message, especially if there's larger volumes involved. So if it's going to be raised by the operators, usually raised by 100%, by 50%, 60%, 300% sometimes. So they're immediately, from the moment that the operator raises the prices, they're going to be making a loss. So in order to avoid the loss, they will raise the pricing the same way. And because the operators quite often have the ability to raise prices within a week, within a few days, then aggregators will leave themselves the right to raise prices rapidly. And depending on the contract, sometimes you might get a pricing notification upfront by a month, maybe sometimes 3 months. But most usually no one will expose themselves to that kind of potential damage. Or alternatively, if they will expose themselves to that damage, your quality will drop. Because if they're going to be making a 200% loss, they're going to do everything in their power to try to minimize that loss that they're making by doing all of the tips and tricks necessary. How can I make sure that I'm getting a reasonable pricing from my current provider? Ask around. Realistically, ask for alternative offers from reputable companies, especially looking at organizations, their governing bodies, where real businesses are part of those, businesses that are prominent, especially if you're looking to get real value out of the business. Look at companies who are willing to talk about value, who are looking to actually provide value, who understand how the message goes, are quite transparent about business messaging and how it works, what different nuances are, and then ask for multiple different points of pricing and then compare them. That is how you will usually understand what the average market price might be. Or go ask the operator. Ask them for a price. And the pricing you will get will definitely be higher than what an operator, sort of an aggregator, can offer you. But I would assume that in most cases, it's not going to be like 400, 500% higher than what an aggregator could give you, especially if you take into consideration that maybe go in with a higher offer in terms of volume than you might have to an operator specifically. Because, you're probably not going to want to connect to them. You just want to understand what's the bottom pricing in that market. So ask around, ask reputable sources, see what the possible pricing might be, and that will give you a better understanding of how to aim your understanding of whether you're getting a fair price or whether you're not getting a fair price. Are lending companies treated differently from others when it comes to SMS pricing? I wouldn't say so, but it really depends on the market as well. There are certain markets that will have special restrictions on lending companies, like Vietnam, for example. There are countries where lending companies are pooled together with financial service providers that by de facto will have higher pricing because of it. Usually financial service providers have money, hence messaging, companies, businesses, operators are going to ask more money from them. I wouldn't say that lending companies per se have special restrictions. It really depends on what they're lumped together with. Are they put together with financial services? Are they put together with gambling companies? Where are they associated? And that will determine what the pricing will be. Or sometimes, like in Estonia, it doesn't matter whether you're a lending company or a financial service provider or a logistics company. The pricing is going to be the same. So it very much depends on what the operator has determined that pricing to be. Sometimes it can be different, sometimes it won't. And that's why that expertise knowledge comes into play. Does your actual provider understand where a lending company is associated within that market scale? Does higher price automatically equal better quality? Where is the point of diminishing returns? No, higher price doesn't immediately mean better quality, right? Usually when you're talking about what an aggregator would, usually like to make off a business text message, then if you're a high volume sender, then most will be assuming to make about 25 to 30% margin on average. That's how you build a sustainable business, at least having that. So if you're sending 3 million messages, you roughly understand in Norway what your let's say, Norway example would be good. Norway, 3 million messages, you know what the bottom price are because you check the actual Telenor's webpage to understand what the pricing is. Add another 25 to 30% on top, and that will be the rough pricing that you will get your quality service with in most cases, because that pricing will be sustainable for the actual aggregator in the long term to provide a proper business and provide the actual service that you're interested in, while simultaneously making sure that they're not fiddling around with stuff. Paying 100% on top of the actual market price usually won't get you a significantly better service than if you're paying, 50% on top. The difference, of course, is what do you get for your extra money, right? Maybe you're not paying a service fee. Maybe you're not paying a setup fee. Maybe you're not paying, an anti-fraud fee or whatever other products that they actually have. And they've incorporated those pieces of the business into their margin. So it's to take into consideration, what are you going to get for your extra money, and compare not just price to price, but compare value to value. What is it that I'm getting for that price? Not just what the actual nominal value for single text message is. What's the additional value? What am I getting on top? That's how you compare that price point as well. What is auto replace? Cool. So auto replace is a feature that we have in our product as well, that takes characters that are not within the GSM character set and changes them to equivalents from a GSM character set. What this means essentially is that you have a special letters in Estonian, for example, where we have, an O with dots on it called Ö. So if you send that in a regular text message, that letter doesn't exist within the GSM character set. Unless it does, and my team will be screaming at me that it actually does, and I don't remember the GSM character set anymore. But anyways, if that doesn't exist in the GSM character set, what happens is that the message still delivers. Well, it still delivers nicely. The only difference is that it is delivered as a Unicode message, so in a different essential character set. And in that character set, a text message, one single text message length, is not 160 characters, it's 60 characters, which means that if you optimized your text to be exactly 160 characters or 158 characters just to be sure, and you send it out, it will be going to your client as 3 or 4 text messages, which means you'll be paying for 3 or 4 text messages instead of 1. This has happened to clients of ours as well before we had these features, and clients that have come to us with the same issue where they send out a marketing campaign, they think they're sending it to 10,000 people, they send it out, all of a sudden they've sent out 40,000 messages. You have a marketing campaign that you think is going to cost you $2,000 is going to end up costing you $8,000 because of one simple mistake. And auto replace is essentially something that helps prevent that or helps mitigate the damage potential that can come from that particular thing. That's why auto replace. 2 more questions. Are there any common fees that aren't usually shown in the public pricing, but you should be aware of before choosing the provider? Good question. Most usually, the question is, are you going to be paying a fee for any additional features? Are you going to pay some sort of a setup fee? Usually setup fees are set up front. Service fees can just be found on invoices that you didn't know that were there. Support fees that you didn't know existed might also be there. But things that you will also sometimes pay for and pay additionally for are things like fees from two-way messaging. Every number that you actually buy costs. The setup for them costs as well. But sometimes those costs aren't actually presented to you. And instead of that, you will just find them on the invoice. You want to say, hey, I want to receive messages in Estonian as well, not just send them. Sure, fine, we'll set it up for you. And then when you actually look at the invoice, you'll be paying, let's say you take 10 numbers, you'll be paying, 500 to 1,000 euros per month for actually leasing those numbers every month. And then you'll have 1,000 euro setup fee on top as well, just for sending those numbers. So there are certain things to look out for, especially considering what your actual use case is and asking information whether this is a regular use case or this isn't a regular use case. If you're just sending a text message out, a regular OTP will probably be the most basic use case you can have. That's your baseline. So if you're adding anything on top, from promotional to two-way to rich messaging to anything else that you want on top, faster response times, better features, etc., there's a possibility that you're going to get charged for it. And sometimes that charge may only happen on the invoice when your account manager won't actually mention how much that costs. And the last question as well. Hi, thank you for organizing these sessions and sharing knowledge. Question: blocking countries that are not business relevant was mentioned the other day as one of the potential AIT countermeasures. Aren't there regulatory implications or concerns of blocking an EU member state? Thank you. So it's less related to the regulatory side of things, and it's more of a question of, will you decide to provide the service in a specific way? So I don't think there are too many regulatory limitations that will, inhibit you from not sending text messages to one or another country, especially if there's legitimate interest to provide the service in a different way. It's a question of, will you block those people from being logged in at all, which you shouldn't do, or will you change the method of execution for those people? Let's say they won't be able to log in via SMS if they're from, countries that you usually don't get business from, but they will have an alternative login channel. Maybe they'll log in via email. Maybe they'll log in via some sort of specific app like Google Authenticator or something like that. They will still have an opportunity to use your service. You won't be blocking the service off, but you'll be using an alternative method of authentication that is not exposed to AIT in that way. And as such, will protect you from taking additional damage while still providing the service to the business you're actually working with. So it's a question of, will the person who's using your platform, your service, whatever you provide, will they be able to still use it? Yes, provide and make sure that they are able to use it. But you are allowed to use different methods to do so, and you can just not send a text message and add email verification instead. For example, if you want to go down that route, and if there is a significant possibility of that damage being occurred on you. So, that's the direction I would take here. Cool. Very nice to see. There were a lot of questions this time. I'm really, really happy that there were so many questions. Another iteration of the Messaging Maven will be coming up soon. I'll be sharing ideas and posts about when, where, what, and what the next topic will be. And if you have any other questions, hit me up on LinkedIn, write to us, or just find me on, whatever messaging related event you might find me at, and ask us questions about messaging, about business, about everything else. And until that time, thank you for watching, and see you next time.